James Henry Troy lived a wonderful and happy life up until he turned 4 years old. He lived with his gentle and kind-loving parents in their beautiful seaside cottage. There was always laughter in the air, plenty of children playing, and the ocean for him to paddle in. It was the perfect life for a little boy like James. On a dark, gloomy day, something terrible occurred. James's mother and father went out for a day filled with shopping when suddenly a large, angry rhinoceros came and ate them whole. Mind you, this was in the middle of the day on a very crowded street. Now, as you can all imagine, this would have been a rather terrible experience for two kind-loving parents. However, in the long run, it was way nastier for their son. All their troubles were gone in the matter of seconds, while James was very much alive. He became very alone, frightened, and excluded from the big wide world. James's life was packed up and moved to live with his aunts. His aunts were two horrible ladies. They were selfish, they were lazy, and they were right out cruel to this little poor boy. So there they lived, Aunt Sponge, Aunt Spiker, and now James, in this tiny shack on the top of a very high hill in the south of England. On the clearest day, James could see a tiny little dot in the horizon, which was where he used to live a happier life with his mother and father. And just beyond that little dot was the ocean and this very faint black line beneath the rim of the sky. James was never allowed to go outside the garden. He was never allowed to go outside the hill, and his aunts would never take him out for even just a small walk. After many years of living and slaving around in his aunt's house, James's luck began to change when he had an encounter with an old man who gave James these magical green objects with a list of instructions. And of course, James executes these instructions and something spectacular does occur. A peach has begun to grow at the top of an old peach tree, and of course his aunts came out to have a look at what all the commotion was about. So as the three of them watched, the peach continued to grow bigger and bigger than the house, and of course Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker capitalized the whole event. They set up fencing around the peach. They charged admission fee to see and observe this object. However, they wouldn't let James touch or interfere with the peach because they were frightened it would disturb and disrupt the excessive profit they were making. That night, James snuck out of the house and went to visit the peach. He then saw that there was a hole at the bottom of the peach. Observing the hole, he then decided to crawl through and eventually entering the hollow pit. However, he was welcomed by an assortment of insects. With no doubt, they intimidated him. Miss Spider, Centipede, Earthworm, and Old Green Grasshopper, and others began a new journey the next day together, cutting away the last attachment to the aunts, flattening anything in the peach's path, and eventually ended up in the Atlantic Ocean. From this point on, James and his insect friends were faced with obstacles. However, they learnt from their mistakes and continued their adventure together. James took the role of being the leader of the peach and continued to save the day. He had never experienced this sense of authority before, nor a continuation of support from his friends. After a long and challenging adventure of flying and floating across the Atlantic Ocean, that black line that James would see in his prison-like room became closer and closer to him. Before he knew it, he was sitting on top of the world. On top of that black line, also known as the Empire State Building, James had reached and achieved his ultimate dream. James and his friends were welcomed and celebrated by the parade that the city that had thrown in their honor. By the end of the parade, the entire peach had been eaten by the local children. James looked around and felt a sense of achievement and had no longer felt like that lonely, frightened little boy who had just lost his parents. James and his assortment of friends had lived a happy life in Central Park. Now, this story of James and the Giant Peach can reflect our classroom students. As humans, we are all trying to find our place in the world. Through the guidance and nurturing behaviour of peers and teachers, students are able to feel a sense of safety and less alone in finding their balance. All students have a goal or dream that they want to achieve, and through the help of teachers to encourage them, they are able to reach this. James was a lonely and frightened little boy after losing his parents. He had no guidance from his aunts. However, when he entered that peach, he was able to feel safe again. And he was able to have the guidance and support from his group of friends, which he had never experienced.